What is the role of religion in our ever-changing world? From the NewsCHannel 5 network, this is Issues of Faith.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Issues of Faith. Glad you are with us. We are talking today about what will church look like in a post-corona world. What will the coronavirus have meant for worship, for Christianity? Kind of where do we go from here? And happy to have with us Dr. Clay Stauffer. He is the senior pastor at Woodmont Christian Church. He also writes a lot of articles for the Tennessean, and he's a professor out at Vanderbilt. He teaches a class on faith, politics, and the polarization of American culture. Dr. Stauffer, thank you so much for being with us.
Ben, great to be back. Always good to be with you.
Yes, I appreciate you coming back. So you wrote an article recently in the Tennessean about kind of predictions, essentially. What's going to happen in a post-corona world for Christianity. And before I get to that, I just want to ask, this past year, how devastating, difficult has it been for churches and just for all of us in general this past year?
Well, without a doubt, it's been a very difficult year. And I would actually categorize it as a perfect storm with multiple waves. And so I've talked about this. The first wave of the storm was the onset of COVID. And we've now lost over 500,000 people that either had COVID or died with COVID. The second wave came last summer after the tragic death of George Floyd. And we had the racial tension and all the riots and just the damage done to businesses in the streets. The third wave came this fall. So we had COVID, we had the racial tension, then we have a very toxic and heated presidential election. And we all lived through that. And the final part of the storm that we've had to endure this past year is just the ongoing mental, physical, spiritual toll that all of this together has taken on our society at large. So it's been really difficult for churches and for all of us.
Where does this then leave us? Where does this leave churches going forward? Hopefully we're beginning to come out of at least the coronavirus part of this, hopefully. Where do you think this leaves churches?
So anything that I say is a speculation and a projection. But I agree with you that we are reaching an inflection point in that case numbers are down from where they were in January. The vaccines are being distributed much more rapidly and effectively throughout the country. Spring weather is coming, so people are going to want to get back outside. And I think all of this is good news. But in terms of the churches, churches have a ways to go to get our people back in the pews the way that things were pre-COVID. And it might take a really long time for that to happen.
You say in your article, online church is here to stay. And the second thing you say is many smaller and aging churches will be forced to close. So that's, what about both of those things?
So on the second one, that's a very sad reality that in America, particularly more rural areas, there are many churches that have aging congregants, and they have been forced to close because of this virus. They didn't have the resources, they didn't have the families and the youth to sustain them. I do believe that digital church is here to stay because that is going to be part of doing church in the 21st century. And so I believe that churches should not fight that. They should actually embrace that and invest in that, because that's another platform for churches to reach people both now and in the days and years ahead. So I think that many churches have stepped up their digital game. They've stepped up their online services, their streaming, and in the big picture, I think that's going to prove to be a good thing.
You wrote, staffing structures will need to change. And what do you mean by that?
Well, in many churches, like our church here in Green Hills, pre-COVID staffing structures were very programmatic. They were very focused on certain age groups or demographics. And I don't think we know for sure, but coming out of this, there's going to need to be more of an emphasis on technology, and the staff members are going to need to be technologically savvy. And I think some of the traditional positions that we've always had in larger churches, may or may not be needed when we get to the other side of this. And so I think we're going to have to adapt and innovate according to what the needs are.
And back to that first one, online church is here to stay. And is that a positive thing? I mean, can churches grow and do what they need to do in an online environment? Or does it concern you in a way that that's here to stay?
Well, it's a difficult question. I think the answer to it is that churches actually have the ability to reach more people. So, for example, during the pandemic here at Woodmont, we've had people that live all over the country tune in to our worship services, to our Bible studies, to our classes, and that's an opportunity that they didn't have before. Now, if you talk to the people who remember the way it was pre-pandemic, they're going to say, well, having fewer people on Sunday mornings is a problem. But if they're dialing in either from vacation or from a lake house or just because they're out of town and they're hearing the message and they're participating in worship, then I think that's a good thing. So it might change the way the numbers look on Sunday morning, but it actually gives churches a chance to cast a much wider net into the community and across the country.
So it is. There's a bigger audience. So that's a positive. You wrote, difficult theological questions will need to be asked and explored. Basically, why does God allow a pandemic to happen? I'm sure people are asking that and questioning that.
Yeah, and that really goes right to the heart of the nature of God and how do you understand God. And I personally don't believe in a God who causes a pandemic to come into the world that ultimately takes out hundreds of thousands of millions of people. But I do think that the possibility has existed throughout history that there are novel viruses and things that happen where this does become a reality. So I don't blame God for causing the pandemic. I actually think God is working through the church, through people, to love and care for each other in the midst of the pandemic. And I think that based on people's theology, if you believe that God caused a pandemic to come and take out, God's children, you're going to have a hard time reconciling that with a loving God that we find in the Bible, that we find in Christ.
And so the question some might ask is, okay, maybe God didn't cause it, but why didn't God stop it? And so if somebody pushed back and asked that, what do you say?
Well, I think God is stopping it through the physicians, through the vaccines, through the people that have become generous, that have given of their time and their money and resources to help people. I just think that God works through us to stop it. Doesn't just stop it automatically. So I would argue that God is stopping it. It's just taking a lot of time, and sadly, in the midst of this, we've lost a lot of people.
I want to go through a few more things that you predicted. I mean, I think it's really interesting. A newfound appreciation for in-person fellowship. I think that's obvious. I mean, we have not had that for almost a year. You think there'll be a new appreciation going forward, right?
Well, that's what I'm already seeing for the folks that have either had COVID or they've already been vaccinated and they're coming back to church. And after a year of being away and worshiping online, they're so thankful to be in the building and to be together. And so something that we always took for granted was being able to gather together on Sunday mornings. That's something that people have really missed. And as great as technology is, and as nice as YouTube and the digital mediums are, it doesn't replace being in church with your faith community. That's still a much different experience than what you're going to get on the screen.
You wrote, we will see a significant decline in unnecessary church meetings. So does that mean some church meetings were unnecessary?
I think it's safe to say that, Ben. I think a lot of times, churches have meetings or committees just because they feel like they need to meet, and they've always done it. And I think, my personal take is a lot of the very busy lay people that are giving of their time are sitting there going, why is this taking an hour and a half instead of, 40 minutes? And so I think many of those meetings are going to just stop, and then many of them will be moved to Zoom and stay on Zoom, because that way people don't have to commute after work. to come into the church. So again, that's where technology and embracing technology is going to help us become more efficient. And so, yes, I do think that there are many church people in all different denominations that would say there were lots of meetings before that were a complete waste of time. And a lot of those have gone away during the pandemic.
Very interesting, and the church has continued. All right, I'm going to put these next two together. I think they're absolutely right. The importance of small groups will only grow, and a deep hunger for hands-on mission will be present. I guess, yeah, explain that.
So for me, at our church, we have a huge emphasis on small groups, life groups, community groups, and the people that have stayed the most plugged in during the pandemic, at least as I've seen it, are not only worshiping online, or maybe they come in person, but they are plugged into a small group or to a class. And that's where their relationships are built and sustained. And so it's been said before that as a church grows larger, it must grow smaller. It grows smaller through the small groups, because that's where relationships are formed, and that's where trust is built. In terms of the hands-on mission, the pandemic has prevented us from being able to do many things that we usually do. So, for example, host things like AA or Al-Anon, because those are big meetings that have a lot of people. Go and work on habitat houses. Go and tutor. Our partner school is Fall Hamilton Elementary, so go and be a reading buddy. Well, they've been virtual for most of the year. So because of the virus and because of people's fear of getting the virus, a lot of that mission has had to kind of be parked and put on hold. Well, I think when people are vaccinated, there's going to be this hunger to get back out in the world and serve, because that is a meaningful endeavor. That is where we put our faith into action. And so I think once we get to a place where things are much safer, we're going to see a lot of people that want to go back and do that.
Do you think, and before I get into your next thing, do you think churches, they faced challenges before this pandemic? Is this going to help kind of make them sharper? Is this going to improve them more quickly, or does this come at a really bad time and it's going to have a really detrimental impact? I mean, what do you think as far as big picture in terms of that?
So a lot of people have asked, will COVID move the American church further down the line of secularization, right? Will we become a more secular culture? You had a guest on Issues of Faith not that long ago named Susan Beaumont. She's a church consultant. We've used her and worked with her. And she basically is encouraging her churches and ministers that she's working with to look at this as an opportunity. Look at this as an opportunity to try new things, to let go of some things that you've just kind of been holding on to because they were always there, and look at it as a chance to restart. And so I think the answer to your question really lies in how the ministers, the clergy, the lay leadership of different congregations approach this. Is it an opportunity, or is it a complete inconvenience? And I think what you'll see out there is some churches are grabbing it by the horns and using it as an opportunity, and other churches have allowed it to completely deflate their spirit, and they're really upset that they can't do the things they usually do.
Interesting. Okay, we're going to take a break. Then I'm going to come back. One of the things you wrote was churches that can successfully navigate the contentious political divide will draw new people. And of course, you're teaching a class out there at Vanderbilt on polarization in American culture. So we'll talk about that. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.